Hello guys, I believe you are doing well over there. Welcome to our YouTube channel. In this modern day video, I will tell you, is there life on the moon? Let's get started. Humans have long imagined the kinds of creatures or peoples that might live on Earth's moon. This section briefly describes ideas about lunar life in the 17th, 19th and 20th centuries through a series of items from the Library of Congress's collections. By examining ideas about life on the moon, insights emerge about the interplay between imagination and rigorous thought in our developing understanding of the universe. Flying bat people on the moon? In 1835, the New York Sun published 6 articles describing the discovery of various species of creatures inhabiting the moon. Allegedly written by Dr. Andrew Grant, the stories claimed to report on recent discoveries from the prolific astronomer John Herschel. The articles were in fact written by Richard Locke, a reporter working for the New York Sunday. In the articles, Herschel is alleged to have observed creatures that look like bison, goats, unicorns, and tailless beavers in forests on the moon. The most stunning find, however, was the discovery of human bat creatures who had constructed temples on the moon. These stories brought considerable attention to the New York Sunday. People around the world were interested in learning about the inhabitants of the moon. Several weeks after publication, these stories were dismissed as the Great Moon Hoax. However, if the public had responded differently, it might just as well have become the Great Moon Satire. The believability of the stories in their time speaks to ideas about the possibility of life on the moon in the 19th century. In scientific circles, the notion that there could be sophisticated life on the moon was quite plausible. John Herschel's father, astronomer William Herschel, had worked to document life on the moon. In 1778, William Herschel believed he had observed lunar towns, but by the 1830s, observations of the moon were making it less likely that there were lunar civilizations. Popular science writers continued to insist that the moon was inhabited. In 1838, Thomas Dick, a popular writer on Christianity, philosophy, and astronomy, wrote, "The moon is inhabited by rational creatures, and that its surface is more or less covered with vegetation not dissimilar to our own Earth, and that from a telescope one can observe great artificial works in the moon erected by the lunarians." Similarly, the 1846 textbook The Young Astronomer External explained, "It is the general opinion of astronomers that the moon is inhabited." In popular writing throughout the century, authors suggested that life on the moon was practically a fact. Richard Locke, the author of the stories that have come to be known as the Moon Hoax, insisted that the stories were intended as satire. According to him, his goal was to lampoon what he thought were absurd ideas about lunar civilizations being presented as science by writers like Thomas Dick. The fact that this satirical account would become a hoax itself illustrates that at the time it was a plausible assumption that there was life on the moon. What he thought would be read as an absurd joke was largely accepted and believed as scientific fact. Continued interest in life on the moon. As more powerful telescopes and other techniques for modeling the gravity and atmosphere of the moon were developed, it became harder and harder to support the idea that the moon could be an Earth-like place. After recounting all of the reasons life on the moon is unlikely, a 1915 astronomy textbook notes, "Even with all this, still life in some weird form may exist on the moon external." Indeed, ideas about weird forms of life on the moon found their way into science fiction. H.G. Wells' 1901 novel The First Men in the Moon offered just such a weird form of life. Set in England, the story is narrated by a London businessman, Mr. Bedford, who meets up Mr. Caver, an inventor who created a new material called Cavert that negates the force of gravity. Mr. Caver persuades Bedford to use this material to go on a trip to the moon with him. When they arrive on the moon, it appears to be a barren wasteland until they meet Selenites, the insectoid lunar natives who live inside the moon. Both men are captured by the Selenites, but manage to escape. After their escape, Mr. Caver is recaptured and Bedford returns to England. While the evidence had mounted for a barren lunar landscape, people were still interested in a good story about the kinds of strange life that could exist beneath its surface. Biological interest in the moon and the Apollo missions. In the 20th century, as the possibility of travel to the moon became reality in the Apollo missions, scientists explored the remaining possibilities: what kinds of life could exist on the moon. For example, Carl Sagan wrote on the possibility of lunar organics as part of his doctoral thesis. When it came time to train Apollo astronauts regarding what they might run into on the moon, Sagan was chosen, along with other scientists, and the science fiction author Isaac Asimov, to develop a curriculum for them on the possibilities of lunar organic materials. The procedures for quarantining astronauts who returned from the moon was in part shaped by Sagan's and other scientists' work outlining the possible effects of organic material and microorganisms on the moon. Persistent notions of lunar life. As the Apollo missions advanced toward landing humans on the moon, fanciful ideas about exotic intelligent life forms on the moon persisted in popular culture. Even Dick Tracy was discovering lunar civilizations. The comic strip, which began by following the tough but honest detective in 1931, brought in characters from the moon in the 1960s. In 1964, Dick Tracy rode a space coupe to the moon and on his visit discovered an advanced civilization. The daughter of the governor of the Moon Maid became the liaison to Earth and a frequent character in the strip in the mid-60s. The Moon Maid married Tracy's adopted son, and gave birth to a child halfway between the Earth and the Moon. As the real-world moon landing came closer and closer to reality, the stories of the Moon and the Moon Maid were largely left behind in the comic. Dick Tracy returned to stories of terrestrial crime fighting. The more we learned about the actual conditions on the planets with subsequent space exploration, the less sustainable the fantasy of intelligent life in our solar system became. That's it guys, hope you enjoyed today's video and please don't forget to subscribe and like the video for more interesting videos like this one. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.